Well, this is the moment we've been waiting for. Let's stand together, shall we? Let me introduce to you as our speaker for the night. Give her a good, warm South Jersey reception, Miss Brigitte Gabriel. Come on, give it up. Welcome. So nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Woo! Thank you. I love you too. Thank you. Wow, thank you so much. Thank you for such a warm welcome. I am delighted and honored to be here tonight. You know, people ask me all the time, Brigitte, don't you get depressed talking about such a heavy-duty subject, radical Islam, Islamic terrorism? And I tell them, of course I get depressed. But what keeps me energized, what keeps me happy, what keeps me inspired is traveling the country and meeting people like you who are so happy, who have such passion for this country. You are the wind beneath my wings. When I am bombarded with nasty emails and hate emails and people that just, you know, hate me to no end, I just reflect back on these moments when I'm standing amongst friends and family like you, who some drive hours to come here to hear me speak. You truly humble me and you lift my spirit, so thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And I cannot begin my presentation without thanking the people that made this visit possible. I would like to thank the church, the pastors of the church. I would like to thank Brenda Romes, the Greenwich Tea Party patriot of South Jersey. Our Act for America chapter leader, Sarah Elkins. Thank you, Sarah. And Bernadette Rapisky from Women Against Sharia. Thank you so much. Now, we are here today to talk about an issue that is so important to our nation, that is so important to us as citizens of the United States. You know, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, who would have thought the foreign policy issue and national security is going to come back to the forefront? And it was really a wake-up call to America to make us realize how fast things can turn and why it is important to always keep our eyes on the ball and why we must protect our country. As I'm speaking to you right now, there are 44 conflicts around the world happening between Muslims and non-Muslims, regardless what the nationality of these non-Muslims are, regardless what language they speak, what passport they hold, what color their skin is. 44 conflicts around the world. Radical Islam has been on the march for the last 30, 40 years. America has been attacked under different administrations since 1979, whether Republican or Democrat, but we did not pay attention. America was attacked under the Carter administration, a Democrat, with the hostages in Iran under Khomeini. America was attacked again under Ronald Reagan administration, a Republican, with the blowing up of the Marines in Lebanon in 1983. America was attacked again under George Bush Sr. administration. America was attacked again under the Clinton administration, a Democrat. It was actually under President Clinton that the World Trade Center was attacked the first time in 1993. It was also under President Clinton that the Taliban trained 10,000 Al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan. These people were not being trained for entertainment. They were being trained to attack the United States of America. At that time, George Bush Jr. and Dick Cheney were not even a blurb on the political American landscape. And then, of course, we were attacked on 9/11 under President Bush. And people thought, oh, they hate us because we are in the Middle East. They hate us because of our foreign policy towards Israel. And they thought if we just elect President Obama, all our sins are going to be forgiven and Al-Qaeda is just going to be friends with us. 2 days after President Obama became president, Al-Qaeda issued a press release. We continue our jihad against the United States, regardless of who lives in the White House. And since President Obama became president, we have arrested on American soil over 75 homegrown terrorists, all Muslims either born into the Islamic faith or have converted to Islam, trying to kill Americans or perpetrate terrorist attacks against America. And while our president wants us to believe that our problem is only with Al-Qaeda, if we just eliminate Al-Qaeda, all our problems will be over. Everything will be fine. The reality is, the people that we have arrested in America, the over 75 that I mentioned, were not card-carrying members of Al-Qaeda. And I'll just read you a few names. Nasser Abdu, the would-be Fort Hood shooter, the second shooter, was not a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda. Khalid Ad-Dawsari, the Lubbock, Texas would-be shooter, was not a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda. Muhammad Hussein, the would-be shooter in Baltimore, was not a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda. Muhammad Mahmoud, the would-be bomber, shooter of Portland, remember the lighting of the Christmas tree? He was not a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda. Faisal Sazad, close to you, the guy who wanted to blow up Times Square, he was not a card-carrying member of Al-Qaeda. Just to give you the tip of the iceberg, I can go on and name you names, over 75 homegrown terrorists. Now, when we killed Osama bin Laden, our president wanted us to believe that our problems were over. The Arab Spring is great, democracy is coming to the Middle East, we eliminated Al-Qaeda. And obviously the events in the last few days proved differently. Because it proved that what we are fighting is the ideology, not necessarily one organization that represents a name. What makes the ideology so dangerous and the organization so dangerous is that no matter what the terrorist organization is named, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Hamas, whether it's Al-Shabaab, or Al-Jama'ah Al-Islamiyya, or Al-Mujahideen, or Islamic Jabhab, or Al-Ikhwan Al-Muslimin, I can rattle down names of terrorist organizations until tomorrow. What they all have in common, regardless of what country they operate in, is the ideology that bonds them together. When our embassy in Egypt was attacked 2 weeks ago, and our embassy in Libya as well, and the flag that was hung in Egypt over our embassy, the Islamic flag, our media was saying that it is the Al-Qaeda flag that was hung over the embassy. That was not the Al-Qaeda flag. That was the most authentic, original Islamic flag invented in the 800s by a caliph that was hung. Al-Qaeda basically borrowed that flag. And that's the flag that we are seeing today worldwide when we are seeing Islamic demonstrations. Right now, we have 20 American embassies that have been attacked in the last 2 weeks. We're not hearing the news because our government is not allowing the American public to see the news. Our government is not allowing the intelligence to come out, because the intelligence is so damning to how lax we have become when it comes to our security. Our embassies don't have bulletproof windows, don't have reinforced doors, and in Libya's case, the embassy even had a Muslim Brotherhood front organization providing security, not our Marines. Did you know that? The group that our government assigned to protect the embassy was an Islamic Muslim Brotherhood front called the February Brigade. So we had our enemy guarding our people. And a politician of the newly elected Libyan government told that group that an attack was going to happen on the embassy and for them not to protect the ambassador until the operation was done. And when the ambassador ran and hid at another house, the safe house, as we have with all our embassies, where supposedly no one should know where he went and hid, it was his bodyguards, the same rebels we funded and supported and then hired to protect our embassy, that tipped the people outside who are coming to kill him where he was, and that's how they came, kidnapped him for 12 hours, tortured him, mutilated him, sodomized him, and then killed him and dragged him on the street behind the truck. That's the information that this administration is not letting out to the American public. And I just shared with you the tip of the iceberg. In the coming weeks, you'll learn more and more and more. At least if Fox News decides to release the information. Now they're butting heads with the White House. We have a problem with the rise of radical Islam, and that's a problem that we must address. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about this issue. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this issue is because it affected my life personally. And for those of you who do not know anything about my personal life, allow me to share with you a 5-minute so you can understand where this fire comes from within wanting to defend our country. My 9/11 happened to me in 1975 in Lebanon, when the radical Islamists blew up my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble wounded, as they shouted, Allahu Akbar. I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months. And as I laid in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs in both arms, going from one surgery to another, I would ask my parents, why did they do this to us? And my father would tell me, because we are Christians, the Muslims consider us infidels and they want to kill us. So I learned since I was a 10-year-old little girl that I am wanted dead simply because I was born into the Christian faith and lived in a Christian town. I ended up leaving my home, leaving the hospital and coming back home. But my home was no longer the home I left. I ended up living with my parents in a bomb shelter underground in an 8-by-10 room without electricity, without water, and very little food. To get some food, we would crawl out under the bombs, and we would dig out different dandelions and different vegetation so we can eat, because it was the only greenery we had. To get some water, we would crawl to a nearby spring. And every time we left our bomb shelter, we would say our last goodbyes because we did not know if we're going to come back alive or dead, just to get a drink of water, because we were surrounded by snipers, Islamic snipers, shooting at us to kill us. And when we would get to the nearby spring, my mother had to use her stocking on top of the gallon of water to catch all the junk and all the dirt, and so we can drink the water. And this became my existence. We lived in the mountains. It was very cold. And in the wintertime, my father would go out and he would break twigs from the trees that grew around our bomb shelter, and he would bring them to the bomb shelter. And he would pour kerosene or mazout or benzene on the twigs and light a fire. And we would huddle around the fire so we can warm up. We had no ventilation in the bomb shelter, and we had only one little door that we had to duck under to get into the bomb shelter. And many nights we would pass out because of carbon monoxide poisoning. And we had an agreement before we went to bed that whoever woke up first in the middle of the night would drag the other two outside and shake them until they woke up. One of us woke up because we will pass out because of the carbon monoxide poisoning. And we lived in this bomb shelter waiting for the world to wake up and come and help and see what's happening to the Christians. And no one came. I ended up living in that hellhole for 7 years of my life, from the age of 10 till the age of 17, robbed of my youth. And when we first went into the bomb shelter, we thought the world is going to wake up. My father would say, America, the big Christian countries, are going to come see what's happening to the Christians in Lebanon, and they're going to come save the Christians. Because you see, at that time, the Islamic radicals organized and came together with the Palestinians who came to Lebanon and began massacring the Christians. One of the biggest massacres, most famous massacres in Lebanon was the massacre of the Moor. They would surround the Christian city. They would walk into a bomb shelter. They would find a mother and a father hiding in a bomb shelter with a little baby. They would take the baby, tie one leg of the baby to the mother, and another leg to the father, and pull the parents apart, splitting the child in half. They would walk into our churches, urinate and defecate on the altar using the Bible as toilet paper, and then torch our churches. The last lady that worked for me was mentally disturbed. I hired her so I can take care of her and her family. And the reason why she was mentally disturbed is because they walked into her bomb shelter, they tied her son, her 16-year-old son, on her lap, held a knife to her hand, and made her slit her own son's throat, and then raped her 2 daughters in front of her. They committed monstrosities that were seldom reported in the Western media, because most of the Western media was located in West Beirut, the area that the Islamists controlled. We knew we were surrounded to be slaughtered, and we knew what our fate was going to be. And we waited for the Christian world to wake up. Britain, France, Canada, America, and nobody came, and nobody cared, and nobody understood what was happening in Lebanon. Lebanon used to be the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. The Christians started fleeing, started being persecuted and flee, and the Muslims grew and grew and grew. I remember at the age of 13 years old, 3 years after living in our bomb shelter, a friend of ours, one of our Christian militia, stopped by, and he said, "Brigitte, I just want you to know that we heard a lot of chatter on the radios, and we believe that the Islamists are going to have a huge attack against us tonight." And he said, "If I don't see you tomorrow, if we die, I want to wish you a merciful death." And he gave me a big hug, and he left. And I remember dressing as a 13-year-old in my Sunday best, my Easter dress, because I wanted to look pretty when I am dead, knowing that when they come to slaughter me, there would be no one to bury me. And I remember sobbing as I begged my mother, "I don't want to die. I'm only 13 years old. Please, I don't want to die." And there was nothing my mother could say to me. And we sat in the corner of our bomb shelter, and we started praying, and my father started reading from Psalms. "I shall walk into the valley of death and fear no evil, for thou art with me." And my parents said to me, "When they come to slaughter us tonight, we'll create a distraction. We just want you to run towards Israel and never look back." You see, we lived on the border with Israel. And we knew if we run to the Jews and beg for help, the Jews are not going to kill us because we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims. Thank God I did not have to make that decision that night, because that's the night when Israel came in physically into Lebanon and pushed away the radical Islamists away from our town and set up artillery bases around us so they can defend us, so the Islamists and the Palestinians would not be able to come into our town and slaughter us. And this is how I continued living for another 5 years of my life, until 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon. And Israel invaded Lebanon because Israel was working with the Christians, trying to help them take back their democracy. Because at that time, in 1982, Lebanon had 11 Islamic terrorist organizations operating out of the country, including the PLO. As Israel came and kicked the radical Islamists all the way to Beirut and got rid of Yasser Arafat all the way to Tunisia, we came out of the bomb shelters and back to rebuilding our lives. I ended up moving to Jerusalem in 1984 and becoming news anchor for World News in the Middle East, working out of Jerusalem, covering world events, reporting on world events night after night. And this was in the 80s, from 1984 till 1989. And as I reported on world events night after night on terrorist activities, I started realizing that no matter where the terrorist activity took place, no matter what continent, the name of the perpetrators were always the same: Ahmed, Muhammad, Hussein, Ali. The name of the victims were always Westerners, Christians and Jews: Terry Waite, Terry Anderson, Colonel Higgins, the Achille Lauro, the TWA, the Panam flights, and I can go on and on. As a matter of fact, in my first book titled Because They Hate, I have pages upon pages upon pages of all the attacks against the United States and Western interests where America did not pay attention. because we did not connect the dots. And I started realizing that what I used to think was a regional problem between a majority Muslim Middle East trying to either kill or expel the minority Christians and Jews had become a worldwide problem. But the world was not paying attention. The world was not connecting the dots. The world lacked imagination. And isn't this exactly what the 9/11 Commission report said to us? We lacked imagination. It's not that we did not know that Al-Qaeda wants to attack the United States. They told us exactly how they want to attack us. We have never faced an enemy that is so open, so clear with their agenda. They not only tell us what they want to do to us, they write about it, they issue press releases about it, they even record videos and send it to Al Jazeera and to CNN. That's how clear they are. And we refuse to listen. Al-Qaeda kept saying, we hate the United States, we want to attack the United States. They attacked the United States in 1993, the first time, the World Trade Center. They attacked the Kubar Towers in 2005. They attacked our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 2007. They attacked the USS Cole. And then they realized we were so asleep, we were not paying attention, that they felt so confident we completely are blind. They came back and re-attacked the World Trade Center the second time in 2001, and this time they brought the buildings down, killing almost 3,000 Americans on that day. We cannot say we did not know. Today, 10 years after September 11th, we cannot say we lack imagination. We try, but our enemy is not letting us forget about it. I mean, we were forgetting about the whole national security foreign policy issue. We were worried about job and an economy. And what happened 2 weeks ago? Brought it back to the top news 24 hours around the whole news cycle, every TV station you turn into. They are not letting us forget about it, but we are forgetting about it. So, what launched all this Islamic hatred that is now spewing worldwide? An organization that you are very familiar with its name, especially since last year. But our government doesn't talk about it much. It's called the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the mothership that launched all these Islamic radicalism that we are witnessing today. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928 and has 70 offshoot organizations, including Al-Qaeda and Hamas. So for those who say, well, they hate us because they attacked us because of our foreign policy. They hate us because we are friends with Israel. They hate us because we are in the Middle East. So if that is true, then why was the Muslim Brotherhood founded in 1928? At that time, Israel wasn't even in existence. Foreign policy, because of our foreign policy, at that time, we had such an isolationist foreign policy to the point that Newsweek magazine in 1939, on its front cover, the front cover said, country divided 50-50. 50% of Americans want to go to war with Hitler, and 50% of Americans said, who gives a care what happens in Europe? We've got jobs and the economy to worry about. That's how much of an isolationist policy we had. So why was the Muslim Brotherhood founded? The Muslim Brotherhood was founded to bring back and resurrect the Islamic Caliphate, or the Islamic Empire, that had ended 5 years prior in Turkey in 1924 by President Ataturk. A group of mullahs in Egypt got together and said to themselves, how can Christendom win over Islam? Islam is the most powerful religion on earth. The Islamic Empire had ruled for 1,400 years. How can Christendom win over Islam? So they got together and they said, we're going to bring back the Islamic Caliphate. And they started organizing. We in the West ignored them, thought, Islam is over, it's finished. And they organized and they organized. And what gave birth to the Islamic movement are two things: The discovery of oil in the Middle East, which gave the Islamists the power and the money to buy weapons and machinery and build Islamic radical schools, the Wahhabis, operating mosques and madrasas worldwide, and Khomeini coming to power, courtesy of Jimmy Carter, in Iran in 1979. And since then, things started spiraling out of control. We were not paying attention. We were asleep. So why should we be concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood? Because the Muslim Brotherhood wrote a plan in 1982. In 1982, why did they do it in 1982? Because it was about 10 years after they started getting the oil wells flowing into the Middle East, and Ayatollah Khomeini came to power. Now they have the money and they have the spiritual leader to mobilize an Islamic movement worldwide and call it different names. They wrote a plan in 1982. It's a 100-year plan for radical Islam to infiltrate and dominate the West and establish an Islamic government on earth. In the counterterrorism circles, this plan became known as the Muslim Brotherhood Project. What makes the project so unique is it gives tactics and proposals as to how to infiltrate the West, how to dominate the West, how to use our open-mindedness against us, how to use our tolerance against us, how to use our good-heartedness against us, how to use our legal system against us, our laws, our freedom of the press against us. They talk about how to set up non-profit organizations and civic organizations and maintain the appearance of moderation in order to advance the radical Islamic agenda in the West. They talk about how to get democratically elected Muslims on all levels of government in the West, including NGOs, etc. They talk about how to get Muslims on the board of different political parties. It doesn't matter what the party is in the West, in order to have a swaying vote in the direction of that party. They talk about appointing Islamic interns on all levels of government in the West, and I'm not only talking about the United States, so they can have a bird's eye view, an insider eye view as to how policy is made on the highest level. They talk about how to work with like-minded, quote, progressive organizations that share similar goals. And this is why when you see CARE, for example, working with the ACLU, you scratch your head and you think to yourself, how can these two organizations have anything in common? But the ACLU is being used as the useful idiots at the hands of CARE in order to advance the radical Islamic agenda in America. The Muslim Brotherhood, since they wrote the plan in 1982 and began implementing it, especially in Europe, Europe today is no longer Europe. Europe has become Eurabia. It is not the Europe you used to go visit and take vacation in 20, 30 years ago. It's a completely different place today. As I'm speaking to you right now, in France alone, there are over 725 no-go zones where the police cannot even enter because these are Islamic zones. In England, as I'm speaking to you right now, there are 85 Sharia courts operating parallel to British courts. Who would have thunk it? If you would have asked any British man on the street 20 years ago, do you know that 20 years from now, you're going to have a legal system operating in Britain completely contradictory to the British laws? They would have looked at you and said, you are out of your mind. Just as much as if you would have stopped somebody in New York on September 10th, 2001, and you told them tomorrow the World Trade Center are going to be brought down by box cutters, by 19 men with box cutters. They would have looked at you and said, you are nuts. This is the world we live in today. So why are we concerned about the Muslim Brotherhood? Because they wrote the plan for the destruction of the United States in 1991. Here is the plan. This plan was presented as evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial in Dallas, Texas in 2007 and 2008, the largest ever terrorism trial in the history of the United States, where the United States government handed down 108 guilty verdicts to Muslim American and Muslim American organizations, raising millions of dollars in the United States and sending it to the Middle East to support terrorism. The title of the plan is مذكرة تفسيرية للهدف الاستراتيجي العام للجماعة في أمريكا الشمالية. This is the explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal for the group, for the Muslim Brotherhood in America, written 5/22/1991. And I'm just going to read you one paragraph of the plan. We have it, by the way, in Arabic and in English, and I will give you information later on how you can get your hand to it by going to our website. But let me read you just one paragraph so you can get an idea on what they mean. Here's a section 4, understanding the role of the Muslim Brother in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, which is the Arabic word for brothers, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers so that it is eliminated and Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. Pretty clear, right? They don't mince words. They tell us exactly what they want to do. This pretty much sums it up, what they want to do in North America. Here is the dangerous part, and here is the most important part of the plan. The most important page of this document is the last page, because the last page lists 29 front Islamic organizations set up in America to sabotage and destroy our miserable house by our own hands. And I'm gonna just read to you, mention to you a few of the organizations which I'm sure you're familiar with. Number 1 is ISNA, Islamic Society of North America. Number 1 on the list. Now, if the name ISNA sounds familiar to you, it's because now they are advisors to President Obama on Middle East policy. We not only have the fox watching the hen house, we have the fox inside the hen house, the White House, talking to the ear of the president. And you wonder why President Obama threw Israel under the bus and is throwing our Arab allies under the bus as well, like he did to Mubarak. ISNA actually is so powerful that right now ISNA is leading the purge, putting pressure on our government to take out any word relating to Islam and linking it to terrorism, like radical Islam, Islamic terrorism, Islamic jihadism, jihad, anything like that. They're taking all these words out of our counter-terrorism training material by which we train our FBI agents and our first responders. That's ISNA. Number 2 on the list is the MSA, the Muslim Student Association. The Muslim Student Association has more chapters on American college campus than the Democrats and the Republicans combined. And you wonder how we're losing our universities? But I'll get into the university details a little bit later. Number 8 on the list is NATE, the North American Islamic Trust. The North American Islamic Trust controls the deed of the majority of mosques in the United States. Number 22 on the list is IAP, Islamic Association for Palestine, which birthed CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations. This plan, and I just touched on some, remember 29 front Islamic organizations. I only listed some of them to you. What they focus on in this plan is how they're going to infiltrate our society in order to sabotage and destroy our society on every level. On the education level, on the publishing level, on the media level, on the political level. They have different prongs. They have not forgotten anything. As I am speaking to you right now, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, is building a 20 million media center in Hollywood. You know, movies like you used to watch back in the 80s, Not Without My Daughter with Sally Field, you don't even think you're going to see any movies coming out of Hollywood right now like that. But that's why. In this part of my presentation, I want to focus on the education, because the education is our weakest point, because the education is the foundation of the future of our society. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, most of us and all of us are going to be gone. But it is this new generation that is being educated right now in our schools that's going to be the future of America. And that's why our enemy focused on our education. So, how did they start? They started with the oil wealth flowing into the air, the Middle East. They started thinking, we want to pump millions into American universities, setting up Middle East study department and political science departments and brainwashing the students. So the Saudis looked around and they were able to use a loophole in our system called the Title VI program to funnel the money into our universities. The Title VI program is a program written by our government after World War II to teach American students about foreign languages and foreign cultures so they may be an asset to our country, especially for those who want to get into the diplomatic field, into the CIA or the State Department. So the Arabs started pumping millions of dollars through that program, setting up Middle East study departments, political science departments, and appointing Arab professors who are anti-America and anti-Israel to brainwash our students and make them feel America is bad, America is imperialistic, Israel is evil, and the only time we will have peace in the Middle East is when we get rid of Israel and the poor Arab people are oppressed because of America and Israel. Here's the extent of the Saudi peddling that has taken place on our universities. King Saud of Saudi Arabia, King Fahd, has donated $20 million to set up a Middle East study department at the University of Arkansas, $22 million to Harvard, $28.1 million to Georgetown, $5 million to MIT, $1.5 million to Texas A&M, $5 million to Rutgers University, $5 million to Columbia. Other recipients of Saudi tainted monies include UC Santa Barbara, Johns Hopkins University, Duke University, American University, UCLA, Howard University, and many, many others. From the Ivy League to the community colleges and everything in between, we pump the gas and they pump poison into the hearts and minds of our future generations. And that's why we must become energy independent tomorrow. People ask me all the time, Brigitte, why is the media so biased? I mean, my gosh, if you watch CNN or CNN International, if you're stuck on one of those cruise ships, you know, God forbid, you're only subjected to CNN International. It's like watching Al Jazeera in English. Nothing good about America, nothing good about Israel. You know, my husband watches TV with his shoe in his hand when we are on one of those cruise ships, ready to launch it at the TV. I'm like, honey, they can't see you. We are on vacation. But that's how bad things are. And I tell people, why are you surprised because of the media bias? All these students who have been graduating out of our universities for the last 16, 20 years are today the news writers, the news makers, the bureau chiefs, the news anchors, the decision maker, the policy makers, the foreign policy shapers. And you wonder why we are at this point? Just look at our president. We don't have a commander-in-chief. We have an apologizer-in-chief. The strategy worked so well on college campus that the Islamists decided, why wait until the kids get to college? Why don't we start with them in 6th and 7th grade? This way, by the time they get to college, they're already 18 years old and they vote. So the Islam Project was launched, and they began providing consultants to America's top publishers like Houghton Mifflin and McGraw-Hill, who publish social studies books and science and history books to teach the children in America about Islam. So the Islam curriculum was developed. and where students have to study Islam for 3 weeks in 6th grade and 7th grade, for 3 weeks, adopt Islamic names, go to a mosque on a field trip in order to experience what it's like to be a Muslim, and memorize and recite verses from the Quran. Now, when I started speaking about this, and I wrote a whole chapter about it in my last book titled They Must Be Stopped, people used to say to me, oh, Brigitte, you are exaggerating. I mean, come on. In America, that couldn't possibly be happening because we have separation of church and state. And I said, oh, really? So I decided there's nothing like show and tell. Here's the course. As you can tell, I've got practice with this. There's nothing like show and tell. Here's the course. This is the course on Islam. This course began being implemented in California in 1991, 10 years before September 11th. This course is copyrighted in 1991, put out by an organization called Interaction Publishers, Inc., doing business as Interact. Isn't that a nice English word? Here, the teacher starts her instructions to the students with, from the beginning, you and your classmates will become Muslims. You will be a member of a caravan. The students are already Muslims for the next 3 weeks. The teacher continues her instructions with, dressing as a Muslim and trying to be involved will increase your learning and enjoyment. Finally, trying your best at all tasks will guarantee you an excellent grade and a more enjoyable time. The teacher is already dangling the great carrot in front of the students. Here are the list of names, Islamic names that the students have to choose from. They've got boys' names and girls' names. Abdullah, Khalid, Hassan, Hamza, Ibrahim, Arafat. For the girls, they've got Karima, Maryam, Noor, Amina, Fatima, a whole list. 30 names for boys, 30 names for girls that they can choose from. And here are something they call wisdom cards. And these wisdom cards are like cue cards. You know, when children are studying math and they have their cue cards so they can memorize their multiplication tables. This is the cue card to memorize the Islam lesson. And this card is a fact card. And this card is about jihad. Now, I chose this card in particular because this card talks about jihad. And obviously, you know, we're hearing a lot about jihad lately, like when a suicide bomber blows himself up, he records a video before he blows himself up, and he says, I am dying fi sabilil jihad, fi sabilillah. You know, he's blowing himself up in the path of jihad, in the path of Allah. You've got Islamic organizations named Islamic Jihad. So obviously, jihad plays a major role. Every time Osama bin Laden or al-Zawahiri issue a videotape against America, they're talking about their jihad against America. So here's what they're teaching our 6th grade students in public schools about jihad. A jihad is a struggle by Muslims against oppression, invasion, and injustice. This is a fact card. Now, if these words sound familiar to you, it's because these are the talking points of Al-Qaeda. Every time Al-Qaeda issues a press release against the United States, what do they say? We are fighting America because we are fighting injustice. We are fighting oppression. We are fighting invasion. Anytime you hear Palestinian suicide bombers getting ready to blow themselves up, what do they say? They record their last video. What are they fighting for? Oh, these poor freedom fighters. They're fighting against oppression, and they're fighting against occupation, and they're fighting against injustice. So what's happening right now is our enemy is teaching their talking points in our public schools to our 6th and 7th graders paid for by our tax dollars. Do you see how dangerous this is? Do you see the brainwashing taking place in here? So when these kids are 20 and 30, 20 years from now, and they're going to watch pictures of our soldiers coming home from fighting whatever for against whatever radicals, Islamic fanatics in the Middle East, or they're watching Israel and Hezbollah get into a fight or something like that, they're going to look at our soldiers, they're going to say, well, of course they're going to bomb you. These poor oppressed Muslims, they're only fighting for injustice, and they're only fighting against oppression, and they're only fighting against invasion. Do you see how dangerous this is? Do you see how this is turning a society against itself from within, using our own children to turn against us? Hitler made a very important statement. Hitler said, "Give me the children, I will change society in 10 years." And that's exactly what Hitler did. And this is what we are dealing with today. So while our president talks about Al-Qaeda and they want to attack us and the military this and intelligence that, this stuff is happening nationwide and no one is even paying attention. Allow me to continue. I think this next example is appropriate, especially because we are speaking at a church. And as you can tell, I'm flipping through the whole course. I'm just giving you highlights. Here's a prayer that the students have to analyze in the classroom. It's the Shahada prayer, the salvation prayer, the equivalent to our, in the Christian religion, you have the salvation prayer where I accept Jesus into my heart as my Lord and Savior. This is the one that they say when they want to convert to Islam. So the students have to analyze this prayer in the classroom. Here it goes. Praise be to Allah, Lord of creation, the compassionate, the merciful, King of judgment day. You alone we worship, and to you alone we pray for help. Did I mention this is public schools, paid for by our tax dollars, where we cannot even sing Christmas carols, where we don't even call it a Christmas vacation, it's now called winter break? The prayer continues, guide us to the straight path, the path of those whom you have favored, which is the Muslims, not of those who have incurred your wrath, which is the Jews, nor of those who have gone astray, which is the Christians and the atheists. Here's a class exercise that I'm going to share with you. And I promise it's the last one. The devil made me do it. But I believe this is important to share. Here's a class exercise. Become a Muslim warrior during the Crusades or during an ancient jihad. Explain weapons, tactics, etc. Can you believe this? Excuse me, this is a class exercise? Become a warrior, explain weapons and tactics, etc.? What type of nonsense is this? We need to take political correctness and throw it in the garbage where it belongs and start calling a spade a spade.